Hello and welcome to Criminal Record, the Daily Record's weekly crime show. My name is Norman Silvester and I'm crime reporter with the Daily Record. Our special guest today is former Police Inspector Ryan McDonald. Ryan spent 30 years as an operational police officer, 9 with the RAF Military Police, and a further 21 with Grampian, Tayside, and latterly Police Scotland. Ryan retired in October last year after 3 decades on the front line in a variety of roles from undercover work, counter-terrorism, murder investigations, and fighting serious and organised crime. He has also written a book, Blue Lights, Dark Mind, about his own personal policing experiences and career. Welcome to Criminal Record, Ryan.
Thanks for having me, Norman.
Ryan, why did you decide to leave the police? You're a relatively young man when you left the police. You're still in your late 40s. Why did you decide to leave the police when you could have stayed on?
So it was kind of taken out of my hands, to be honest. I actually retired, ill health retirement, after a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. Occupational health deemed me no longer fit to be a police officer. But you're absolutely right. I'm only 48. I could have went on for another 7-8 years at least. But yeah, unfortunately, it was decided that I was no longer fit for various medical reasons, unfortunately. So yeah, I retired early, far earlier than expected.
Tell us a bit about that. Was that the pressure of the job? How did the PTSD develop? How did that come about? Because it sounds as though you certainly would have liked to have stayed on with and completed your service.
Yeah, no, I absolutely had no plans of leaving, to be honest. So yeah, it developed really from a role as a crime scene manager, not just as a crime scene manager, but that's played a significant part. So yeah, my role as a crime scene manager was deploying into the locus of a crime, major crimes, murders, suicides, sexual offences. So basically, the people in forensic white suits you see on TV or in the newspapers. So yeah, I dealt with some quite significant high-level violence, murders, and just the culmination of toll of dealing with dozens and dozens of deaths over the year, really all kind of built up from there. Yeah, unfortunately, I went through a small period of some suicidal thoughts, and then after some medical assessments, it was decided that the police environment was no longer the right place for me to be, medical-wise.
What you talked about, the stresses and strains of the job and the constant exposure to quite extremes, particularly murders, but also things like sexual assaults and suicides can be very distressing as well. What case or investigation lived with you the most? What's the one that kind of stands out in your career that, not saying necessarily impacted on your health, but one that is a kind of standout in terms of what we just discussed?
Probably my first deployment, as a crime scene manager, to be honest. There was a murder of a man in his own home. He'd been stabbed over 80 times in his front room. That was my first deployment as a crime scene manager. So that probably sticks out. One, because of the level of violence. I think one can only kind of picture what a crime scene would look like if somebody was stabbed to that magnitude. But obviously the unnecessariness of it, the trivial matter that was allegedly behind the incident, so to see that kind of violence in someone's house, looking in one direction and seeing everything normal, pictures on the walls, dinner sitting on the table and on the plate, and then in one turn of a head, someone face down in their own blood after being violently attacked. So that was my first deployment. So that's probably one that sticks out most because that kind of set the scene for kind of 8 years of scene deployments after that and just dealing with death after death. But yeah, that incident was 12, 13 years ago, and it still kind of really, really vivid detail in my mind, unfortunately. So that one probably sticks out as one of the most significant.
Can you just tell me what would this have been when you're in Dundee, when you're in Dundee or Teesside, Grampian? Can you tell us a wee bit
Yeah,
more?
yeah, that was in Dundee. It was a murder of John Kennedy, who was known in his local community, very well liked. He sold cigarettes. It's all reported that it's all well known. He sold cigarettes from his home address, I think the perpetrator just went. If I remember right, it was something to do with a comment that John had allegedly made about the perpetrator's partner, and then it just escalated into this complete unnecessary incident. And yeah, the perpetrator was found because a knife was found close by. Someone had picked it up, not knowing it was a murder weapon. And then, is what always happens in areas, especially after an incident like that, the information intelligence just started filtering through about the perpetrator, and his name was very quickly brought to the attention of the senior investigating officer. And as the intelligence developed, he became a suspect. And then some of the evidence actually came through from forensically from his washing machine where he'd washed clothes and his shower tray where there was remnants of the blood of the victim. So the evidence was quite compelling. Remember right, he was convicted. I think he was sentenced for 17 years. So yeah, I completely.
That was a life sentence, or was that the tariff of 17
Yeah,
years?
he was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum sentence of 17 years. I think it was. I think that was. I think it was around 2012, 2013. That would have been. So we're probably not too far away from his, no doubt, first assessment for fitness for release at that point, I guess.
For parole, yeah. The Daily Record, in particular, we've seen a lot of coverage in the rise in violence relating to turf wars between rival organised crime groups, particularly last year. And we've seen violence in Edinburgh, Glasgow, and elsewhere, machete attacks and fire bombings, a number of arrests as well. People have already been sentenced. And this seems to be part of a wider violence involving rival organised crime groups, not just in Glasgow and Edinburgh, but further afield. What was your own experiences of dealing with organised crime and the violence associated with it? And should the public be concerned about what's happening about this kind of almost on every other day? We seem to hear about incidents involving fire raising or machete attacks, often in suburban areas, in residential areas. Tell us a bit more. Should we be concerned by this? Was it something that concerned you when you were in the force?
Do you know what, Norman? I've kind of been working in preventions and intelligence since back in 2009, 10 is when I probably first went into surveillance training and intelligence work. Organised crime has always been there. It's not new, and there's always been incidents. I think, to be honest, in my opinion, a lot of it is to do with how it's reported and how the public find out, social media, etc. So even back in 2010, we were getting intelligence. We were delivering Osmond warnings, for people who were, suspected of kind of their life is at risk from another organised crime group. We had surveillance operations on targets all over Scotland. So it isn't new. The thing with organised crime is they generally just focus on each other. It's unusual for them to bring in general members of the public. And yeah, there's unfortunate collateral damage when they're involved in the levels of violence, but I think they set out for the violence against each other rather than the public. So I think a lot of it is to do with reporting. As I say, organised crime isn't new. It's been around for decades, probably even since well before me into the 60s, 70s, 80s. It's always been there. I think technology is probably supporting organised crime groups in spreading their wings. The encrypted messaging services and probably even to an extent the lack of or the reduction in policing is probably supporting their cause, if you like. But yeah, it's not. I don't think it's on the rise. I'm sure some crimes are getting reported more now, but in terms of the actual turf wars, it's always been there.
Just different faces and different names, often, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. When one goes to prison, someone else takes over, or someone dies, someone else takes over. But yeah, when I did my intelligence courses way back in 2010, 11, organised crime was a feature then, and the tactics the police use have just kind of got better. So there was always that focus on disrupting serious and organised crime groups. So yes, it's always been there, but there's always going to be a level of worry for the public, because the public don't want to see crime, regardless whether it's someone breaking in a car or whether it's turf wars. The ordinary Joe public don't want to see it, but I think they are seeing it more on social media, so the level of anxiety is probably rising in parallel to that.
You mentioned earlier about obviously the reduction in police numbers, which is well documented, that the numbers of police officers are now available. I think it's about 16,400. Is significantly less than when Police Scotland was formed. I think we're talking between 900 and 1,000 fewer officers. You mentioned that the organised crime's really much the same in its intensity, but you mentioned there also that perhaps it's a benefit to the organised crime groups that there's fewer officers available. Could you expand on that a bit?
Yeah, at the end of the day, organised crime groups have still got to travel across networks. They've still got to travel across the roads. They've still got to move from one part of the country to the other. And it's just a simple fact that there isn't as many cops on the street. There's just no getting away from it. And even the number of 900, 1,000 might not seem that significant in the terms of the geography of Scotland, but it's not just about the numbers, it's about how officers are deployed. For example, when I was a constable in one of the suburbs in Dundee, we probably had 30 to 35 officers on duty at any one time. When I retired as a shift inspector, you're lucky if I had 19, 20. It was a really good day if I had 22 maybe. But then what you're getting is there's more reported missing people. So I was losing a crew to a missing person inquiry. I was losing a crew to an arrest. I was losing a crew to a locus protection. So before I knew it, I was down to 12, 13 officers. So therefore, because of that, you don't have the luxury of proactive policing. I said, when I was a constable on a night shift, we used to plot our cars up all around the city, and we'd look for cars moving about on the roads network, and we'd stop them, we'd be proactive. That just doesn't happen anymore. There just is not enough officers in uniform on the front line to do that kind of proactive work. And I think it's getting sugar-coated with deployment, operational changes like bringing back in community work, which is the right move to do, and we should have community officers. However, that's not the be-all and end-all. That's not the perfect solution. You literally just need more officers available for senior leaders to deploy to incidents and where firefighting calls. I was coming regularly to 20, 30, 40 outstanding calls. And the minute my team were taking over, the control room were on the radio allocating the calls out. Maybe 2-day-old shopliftings, 3-day-old vandalisms. And officers are carrying 40 crimes in their work baskets. And they're just not getting time to do the inquiries. And it literally just comes down to officers on the front line. So because of that, the fallout would be no cars are getting stopped. People aren't getting stop searched as much as they could. Intelligence isn't getting gathered as much as it could, and it isn't getting submitted. So it's just allowing the network of serious and organised crime to travel better, really, across the country.
As you're making the point there, that we've seen Operation Portalege, which targeted this organised crime violence, which is more reactive, which was very successful. But what you're saying is, if we want to target serious and organised crime, we need to do it proactively, having officers freed up to do patrols, whether it be on foot and cars, stopping individuals, stopping suspected travelling criminals, just being proactive against individuals they might suspect of being involved in organised crime or linked to organised crime.
Yeah, exactly. The police know who pretty much all the organised crime groups are. They know the associations, and organised crime counter-terrorism unit at Police Scotland ought to do a really good job. But I'm pretty sure that they are having to prioritise what intelligence is coming through, because there isn't enough of even their officers to deploy to for surveillance work. It takes a lot of people to do a surveillance job. So I don't think they will have the resources there either, which is a real shame, because it comes down to money, because the competent men and women in OC2 and in intelligence development, probably like I did 10, 12 years ago, want to do a really good job, and they are doing really good jobs, but they probably just don't have the resources and therefore the money to, to fulfill that, because criminals still eat, they still buy cars, they still go out, they still live lives, as they still do everything around about their criminality. So there are opportunities to kind of infiltrate and to disrupt the SOCGs, but we just don't have the resources to do it. So it really needs to come down to the basics. And I'll give a quick example that a car was stopped in Dundee. Maybe it was a long time ago. I was in counter-terrorism policing at the time, so probably around about 2008 and 9. And it turned out that this car had two men in it who had visited every airport in the north of England and in Scotland in a 2-day period. And intelligence was passed to the security services, and they developed the intelligence at that point. Now, if that car hadn't been stopped in Dundee, that intelligence may never have crept its way through the right channels to get to the security service for that to be disrupted. So a simple car stop could lead to pretty much anything. But as I said, cops just don't have the time to be proactive. They want to be, but they're just going to call to call to call. And we need to try and get back to that basics to prevent more
That,
serious crime.
that's it. If we want to be serious about targeting organised crime, we need officers freed up to do be sort of preventative work, almost stopping suspects, doing maybe surveillance, that kind of thing. But presumably you can't do that if you're having to deal with 2-day-old shoplifting cases or vandalism cases.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of what they're sitting is saying they've got crime baskets of 20, 35 crimes, and they're getting pressures from supervisors to update crimes that are 4 or 5 days old. And I understand that everyone who reports a crime, their crime is the most important and significant crime to them in their life. I get that, but when officers having to prioritise a wing mirror that's been knocked off a car in a car park from 4 days ago, to having to develop a warrant to gather intelligence to disrupt even a cannabis factory in a local housing scheme. The officers want to do the cannabis cultivation. They don't want to go and do the wing mirror knocked off. But if the person then phones up and complains, and then the officer's getting pressure from the supervisor to go and see that complainer, then it's taking them away from proper police work. But that is just down to numbers. That is what it comes down to.
That's
And
how
every
numbers
police
said.
station across the country is the same.
That's right. If you have a full complement of officers, what should be, as was set at the start of Police Scotland, you could have the officers to go and deal with the wing mirror vandalism, and others happy enough to do the more sort of complex surveillance work.
Yeah, exactly. And I know Tayside has changed their model again to go back to a community focus. So hopefully those type of crime will kind of go past to the community officers who are out on foot and who are doing the kind of non-urgent emergency calls and can focus on that. And then that allows the response officers to go out, and community officers develop intelligence as well, of course, but that allows the response officers to go and deal with the calls that they're meant to deal with, and gather them. Because at the end of the day, intelligence teams can only develop intelligence that's either passed through police officers on the street or other kind of covert means. But police officers given intelligence is a massive part of intelligence development. As I say, stopping cars, that might just be the registration number an intelligence development team we're waiting on. That link to that associate or that criminal is the last kind of piece of the puzzle. But you can only get that if the car is stopped, and you can only stop the car if you've got time. And you've only got the time if there's more officers, and less low-level crime to investigate. So it is all linked.
Just one final point. You don't, however, feel that the recent violence we've seen, for example, the sort of fire attacks, willful fire raisings on domestic homes and commercial properties, that's not really having a wider impact. You think that tends generally to be focused, I suppose, criminal on criminal. It doesn't go beyond. You don't think the public's at more general risk in these situations?
If the public are kind of in the crosshairs and there's collateral damage, then of course there's still going to be a level of risk. But I don't think these criminals are going out to target innocent members of the public. They go out, they say that criminal on criminal, and they are targeting each other because they want to disrupt each other's network because it improves their own. So I don't believe, I don't think that the SOCGs are going out to target random members of the public. But in terms of the ones that are, you're talking, at the end of the day, you've got like shoplifting gangs that are traveling the country. They are obviously targeting, lower level. So they are still serious and organised crime groups. When people hear SOCGs, they just think of maybe drug dealers or firearms, and you know what I mean. But traveling shoplifting gangs are still organised crime groups, and
It's
they
part
are
of the network of criminality, isn't it? The shoplifting gangs.
Exactly. And when I used to police T in the park as an intelligence officer, you would get groups of pickpockets come up and they would steal from tents, and they would travel around festivals and do that. So that is impacting members of the public. So that level of crime group is But the higher level, maybe your firearms, your drug dealing, high level, indirectly, yes, but I don't believe they are going out setting out to kind of involve members of the public.
On a slightly different subject, we've seen a rise in football-related violence at football stadium. We had the incident at Ibrox recently, the Scottish Cup tie, where there was an invasion of the pitch by fans of both Celtic and Rangers. With a story in the Record today relating to the pitch invasion after the Rangers Hibs Scottish Cup final in 2016. Where do you sit with football violence? Is it coming back? Are also, the David Kennedy, the General Secretary of the Scottish Police Federation, was critical yesterday of the response from senior officers at Ibrox following the most recent pitch invasion. What's your take on football violence? Is it coming back? Do we need to be like the old days, a bit tougher with the hooligans, as we used to call them?
So I was actually Tayside Police's first football intelligence officer back in 2010, I think it was. Tayside Police hadn't had a football intelligence. There were only force that didn't have a dedicated officer, and I became the first one. And although I've never policed an Old Firm game, a Celtic Rangers or a Hearts Hibs, because obviously being on the East Coast, generally went over. I've obviously policed games as a cop, as a sergeant, as an inspector for travelling teams. I think what I would say is the majority of supporters are supporters. The majority of people that do go to games, we go because they want to watch their team play, and me being one of them. But again, I suppose like serious and organised crime, there has always been that level of disorder at football matches. But when a football match is categorised, it's categorised depending on, the information and intelligence they have before that game. So the police can only work with the intelligence that they have. If there is no intelligence to suggest any disorder, then the game will be categorised as such, and therefore, by default, there'll be less police officers there. Because the clubs need to pay for these officers. They don't get them for free. They need to pay for them. So the club want to have as least police officers there as possible because it reduces their bill. But is it coming back? It's said it's always been there to an extent. You're always going to get the core who go there and would rather kind of take part in kind of just a typical Saturday fight than watch their game of football. It'll come back. If we give them the opportunity for it to come back, then they'll take the opportunity. So if we police games with less officers and they can see they might have the opportunity to have a quick scrap and there's less cops there, then some of them will take it. And I watched a game not too long ago, and I seen in the crowd, it was on TV, of a young guy who was probably, looking at his stature, was maybe about 16, and he was topless and he had a balaclava on his head. That's not there to watch a game of football. You've got a balaclava on for a reason. You're trying to hide your identity. So things like that should be kind of stamped out, but that's a steward's responsibility in the ground. And unfortunately, I'm not convinced that a lot of the stewards are trained adequately enough in what to spot and what to challenge, because unfortunately, security staff are the cheaper option than police for a football game.
Yeah, I say there was some criticism of the senior officers' approach to the policing of the Rangers Celtic game, or the pitch invasion. Do you have any concerns there, or is it maybe more down maybe better stewarding, maybe the stewardship, better training of the stewards?
Yeah, probably a bit of both. The pictures I saw and the video clips I saw, there were a lot of police officers on the pitch. Some had batons drawn. The tactics I saw them kind of get involved in were the right tactics. You used to get trained at officer safety training every year. So I didn't see the images or video clips and look and go and was kind of recoiled by the tactics of the officers. I thought they were actually doing pretty good. What I didn't see again was too much stewards. But that conversation would have happened with the match commander or the event policing lead up in the control room, along with the senior steward, about who gets deployed and where they get deployed. Because at the end of the day, if somebody's going to get hit by one of the supporters, it's probably going to be a steward, because if somebody punched a police officer in the face, and the next thing they know, they're going to be faced down themselves, and probably 10 officers are arresting them. So we need to maybe remove that risk of the stewards, but we need to balance it between controlling the disorder on the pitch. I don't think, I think I've heard it on Radio Scotland, and I've been listening to a lot of things about this match, and there is always a level of disorder at them, some obviously higher level than others. It's just about we need to be more robust, and I don't know the backstory about the conversations between Celtic Rangers and the police. I've heard different things, but my experience, safety officers and work really closely with the police, certainly in the clubs that I've worked with, and they're picking up at the end of the phone, and their conversations happen often. Meetings happen 3, 4, 5 times before a game. So that communication is there. So maybe they just need to have a look at the roots of communication and maybe polish it up a little bit.
The daily records also cover in the last couple of years the issue of the rising number of assaults on police officers, some very serious. What was your own experience of violence against police officers, police assault? Is it getting worse? If so, why do you think this is the case? And do you think the police need more protection? The Scottish Police Federation have, for example, called for all officers to be trained and issued with taser when they go on duty. What's your position on violence? Is it worse? Did you see it getting worse towards the end of your police service?
Probably a bit of both, Norman. Police officers, culturally didn't report a lot of police assaults. And to be brutally honest, a lot of that was because what we used to say in the police was that the police assault was always the bargaining tool between the defence and the procurator fiscal. So there was a period where the police felt it was pointless charging and reporting because it was always negotiated away. And what I mean by that is, say someone gets arrested for a housebreaking, and as part of that, they ran off and they were arrested and they kicked an officer. So they were also charged with police assault. We would find that a lot of times that when the person was convicted, they'd be convicted of the housebreaking, but the police assault didn't feature, and that's because it was negotiated away. Defence would say, well, plead guilty to the housebreaking, but not guilty to the police assault. And to save court time, the fiscal would agree to it. So the police got disheartened for a while and go, well, what's the point in charging them? But a lot of push from the organisation was keep reporting, keep charging. We can only make a change with the Crown Office if we keep reporting. So reporting of police assaults increased. So I don't think it massively spiked in terms of them happening. I think the reporting and the confidence of the cops putting it on paper to the Crown Office went up. And some real good convictions gave us a bit of confidence that maybe the Crown Office are starting to listen, and they were. But assaults have happened all the time. They're happening still. Cops are probably spat on daily. They're kicked when they're arrested. There's fights in cells. But tasers, 100%. I think it should have been years ago. We're in 2026 now. The last 5-6 years, it should be standard. An officer goes out with baton, CS spray, body-worn video, and a taser. That should be standard minimum PPE for every officer, particularly those who work on their own, because that's what you've got. You've got what's on your belt to help you until your colleagues get there. So Dave is absolutely right. There needs to be far, far more tasers in Scotland because it's a great deterrent.
It really is a deterrent, isn't it? And we don't really, from what you say, we don't know whether it's a case of more people reporting assaults, maybe zero tolerance amongst officers, probably mixed with an increase. Perhaps you mentioned things like spitting and kicking, and obviously having to deal with a kind of wider variety of people now, different types of individuals. What was your own sort of worst personal experience of assault? What was your kind of worst memory of that, of being assaulted?
Do you know, it was actually a bizarre one. It was actually during the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow. What would that be, 2014?
2014.
2014. That was actually I've been threatened with assault. I've been arrested, been resisted. I've been spat on and things. But I was actually crossing a road in Glasgow on my way to duty, and I saw a member of the public kind of bear hugging someone else, shouting for someone to call the police. And obviously, being a wanted officer, you're obligated to get involved. I went over and I asked him, what's the deal? And he said he's just, I think he just smashed the windows of a car sitting at traffic lights. He was clearly under the influence. So I told him I was a police officer. And the minute I told him, the helpful member of the public promptly let go of the guy, which just released his arms. And then he just started swinging out at me because I was in front of him, caught me in the face, both sides, and then just kind of started punching me around the face and the head. But the most disappointing thing was that everybody just kind of stood and watched. That was the worst part. And then I managed to get him restrained on the ground, and I was holding him, and I asked somebody to phone 999. And a police van drove past with some public order officers in it, and I said to someone, "Go and wave them down." And I saw the officer look at the person waving them, and I saw the person who was waving look at the officer and pointing towards me. But the van just drove on. I don't know whether they just got confused or what. I really don't know. And it was another off-duty officer that actually came and helped me restrain him until he actually got arrested. So yeah, that's probably the worst. And the rest of them have been bad enough, but as you would class as probably lower level, as I said, kicks, spits, scratches during arrest and things like that.
Okay. One of the things to highlight daily records as well recently was the Police Scotland came under criticism because they weren't fingerprinting enough suspects that were getting taken into custody. By law, police can fingerprint and photograph somebody that's been arrested, but the tendency has been for Police Scotland, according to a recent report by the Biometrics Commissioner, that suspects are only being fingerprinted and photographed after they've been charged. What's your position on this? Is this another case of, people working in custody, etc., and working general police? Isn't enough officers to do all the things that they need to do at certain times?
Yeah, well, I spent a few years in custody, first as a custody sergeant and then as the custody inspector for Tayside, and had covered some national roles, the duty operational custody inspector and custody review inspector. So, there's a few things, and it depends where you are in the country, because every custody centre is different, and there's still a lot of legacy traditions that are going on across custody. For example, looking at Dundee, custody officers in Dundee still man the front counter. So Mr. or Mrs. Smith comes in to report something. It's custody officers that answer that front counter in Dundee, and that is just absolutely not appropriate, because all they're doing is taking custody officers away from their core role of looking after prisoners and working in the criminal justice to answer queries or directions, or foreign nationals as we coming in asking for help with visas and things like that. That's not what we'll pay custody officers for. So it depends on where in the country. So in regards to Dundee, so taking the fingerprints, the team leader there needs to weigh up when they check the system if their fingerprints are, yes, their fingerprints have to be taken after a charge, particularly, but if the fingerprints are confirmed, and let's say the custody officers go up to the cell and say, you need to come out and get your fingerprints taken, then it happens quite often that an arrested person will say, I'm not going anywhere. I'm just not getting up. You come in here, you've got a fight on your hands. So the team leader then needs to weigh up, do they put their staff at risk by manhandling the prisoner? And you cannot physically stand a prisoner up at a live scan machine and flatten their hands on it to get the prints taken through force. You probably can, but it's going to take a long time and somebody's probably going to get injured. So, in that injury, if someone goes off sick, and then all that does is impact the custody centre. Instead of being able to take 30 prisoners, we might only be able to take 20. So there's a whole bigger picture. But to negate that, you just need to make sure there's enough custody officers on duty. You just need to...
This comes back to what we discussed
Exactly.
earlier, isn't it? If you've got 1,000 down, even an extra couple on duty here or there, it's going to make a big difference, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly, because when a custody officer is off or the staffing's reduced, they're backfilled by police officers from the street. So when I was running the custody centre, we had a minimum staffing requirement of how many custody officers to prisoner ratio, and that determined how many prisoners we could then take into the cells. And if we didn't have enough custody officers on duty, then the duty supervisor would phone the street supervisor and say, I need 2 police officers to supplement my custody staff. And then if that was provided, then we could increase the number of cells we can use, but then all that does is impact how many officers are on the street. But if the street supervisor says, no, I don't have any staff to give you, then that just impacts how many people you can put into cells, and then what tasks you can then do, i.e. fingerprinting. Because if there's only 4 custody officers on duty, they need to feed them, they need to shower them, they can get out to wash their hands, get their teeth brushed, they have to facilitate solicitor interviews, they have to book new prisoners in. All that needs to get done. So one of the easier options to push aside is the fingerprint. And that's probably what's happening in my experience. But again, yeah, you're right. It absolutely comes down to the level of staffing, and maybe more centralised and more up to date. Like Dundee custody, for example, is just an absolute farce of a system. The cells are underground. Custody officers are split between upstairs and downstairs. It's just not a fit for purpose centre. But it's something that I raised for years and years, and many bosses came and said, "Yeah, this needs to change." Nothing's been done, and you've still got custody officers and some queries on the front counter. So some management talk the talk, but there's absolutely nothing getting done to kind of support the development of it.
Yeah, again, just finish off there. It's just another example of a lack of personnel, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you've got more bodies on the ground, boots on the ground, then these same issues don't
Yeah,
come
and
up.
it's not the staff themselves, Norman, because they all do a really good job and they're trained really well and they do want to do more, and they get frustrated themselves when they come in on duty and say there's only 3 of them. Then they're frustrated because they can't do as much. So it's not even training. The training's good and the recruitment's good, or the level of recruitment is good. There's just I was carrying 3 or 4 vacant posts in Dundee, which is a real impactive, and it's all to do with budgets. Or we don't have the money to recruit that post. Well, you're going to need to find it because the fallout was too significant. Sometimes I would wait 9-10 months before a post was filled.
I was going to just on it, bring a conversation to a conclusion. Was there any funny moments? Any funny moments that stand out in your service? It's not all
Oh,
doom and gloom. It must be a lot
no,
of fun at times.
there's lots, and the funny thing with policing is you've got to have that level of sense of humour because you're dealing with so much negativity. You've got to kind of have that funny part. But yeah, God, there's loads. I went to a house in Kinross where a goat had managed to get its way into a house and was standing on the dining table, eating the fruit from the fruit bowl and the flowers. And the elderly couple in there couldn't get the goat out, so phone 999, and we had to go in and grab him by the horns and kind of get him into a field. Everything to a colleague climbing a wall, chasing a suspect, and their trousers ripping on a Saturday afternoon in a busy Union Street in Aberdeen, and nice bright pink boxer shorts on view to everyone in Union Street. I think his only saving grace was that it was probably before the kind of real camera phone type. Everybody was obsessed with phones. So if I had been
That
maybe
would have
last
been in
week,
social media by now, wouldn't it?
it had been everywhere. So you managed to get away with that, But the officers make their own kind of humour, as I said, because if you don't, because you deal with a lot of negativity, it would be really difficult to deal with, all the time. So, we're a unique bunch, and sometimes we make our own humour by playing some real weird and wonderful card games at the times you get a little bit of downtime at 4 o'clock in the morning. It doesn't happen often now. But yeah, lots of stuff. I met the Queen a few times. She told me to get the Duke of Edinburgh into trouble because it was the second time I met her. I reminded her about our first meeting, about when she complained to him about it was raining. And I told her I'd met her before, and she'd remembered, and she says to me, "Well, you could tell the Duke of Edinburgh when he comes down that I was right on that occasion." And of course, I never did anything of such because I don't think he was as jovial as the Queen was. Yeah, but even instances like that, there are a lot of good times, and there's loads of great members of the public that we work with. Some really helpful people. So it's just it's a real black and white career. You can have great days, you can have really terrible days. Yeah, it's definitely unique.
One final question.
Yeah.
What's your biggest concerns for the police going forward? And what would you like to see change? What concerns you most about the future? Just
Probably people leaving and things, because for example, there's no mental health support. There is just no trauma support in the organisation. So you had a massive influx right across the UK of people leaving ill health retired because of mental health diagnoses, because they're not spending money. It's a simple solution: employ mental health staff within Police Scotland or other organisations, so your staff get their support. And then people are disillusioned with promotions, with not getting support. So people are just leaving for other jobs and careers. So when people might have joined to do 30 years, yes, there are some, but there are lots that are leaving early now because they're just not getting the support from senior management. And I think we'll need a whole level of senior leaders to leave culturally and their times, those have got 25 years plus. Once they all go, I think things might get better, because they just don't understand the policing of today, because they've got no experience of frontline policing for the last 10, 15 years. And that just conflicts. So that's causing people to leave. So we need to make the conditions better, the pay better, the support better, and then you'll get people to stay. And then and then by that, there'll be a better service for us taxpayers who phone the police, and we don't have to wait 12, 24 hours to come out to a vandalism. So invest more and support your staff more, and then us as a public will get a better service.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Thank you, Ryan, and thank you for joining us. And thanks to your audience for tuning in to Criminal Record. If you have a question for the team, you can email reporters@dailyrecord.co.uk with the subject line Criminal Record. We'll be back next week. In the meantime, you can subscribe to listen to this podcast on Spotify or Apple by searching for Criminal Record, or you can watch it each week on our YouTube channel. Thank you once again for joining us.